midnight, to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of the Ozark Mountains. Welcome to this journey. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments the exact time at which you're listening to this narration and where you're watching from. What places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach, we're interested in knowing. 022, where the mist clings to the ancient trees like spectral fingers, in the dense forests of the Ozark Mountains, there exists a story deliberately erased from most historical records. The year was 1776, a year known for revolution and the birth of a nation. But while the eastern seaboard was embroiled in war, in the remote wilderness of what would later become Missouri and Arkansas, another kind of darkness was unfolding. 052, from land registration records in colonial Virginia comes the earliest documented mention of the Pruitt family. Nathaniel Pruitt, born in 1734 to English immigrants, was noted as a skilled carpenter and farmer of modest means. Recorded in the parish registry of a small church outside Williamsburg was his marriage to Sarah Blackwood in 1756. 115, for nearly 2 decades, tax records indicate they lived on a small farm during which time they had 5 children. Thomas born 1758, Elizabeth 1760, Catherine 1764, Samuel 1770, and infant Rebecca 1775. Subject to speculation remains what prompted the family to leave their established home for the dangerous frontier. 141 suggests that Nathaniel had encountered financial difficulties, a partial letter discovered in colonial administrative records. "The debts grow beyond my means to satisfy them," he wrote to a cousin in early 1775. "I have heard tell of land in the Western Territories, where a man might claim acreage sufficient to establish a legacy for his children." 205 hints at another possible motivation, another fragment from a different letter dated November 1775. "Sarah has not been well since Rebecca's birth. The physician suggests a change of air might improve her constitution." Whatever their reasons, in multiple sources, the Pruitt family's westward journey was documented. Their purchase of supplies in February 1776 was recorded in a merchant's ledger from a trading post in Kentucky. 232, their passage through a frontier fort in March of the same year was noted by a military dispatch. By April 1776, they had reached the western slopes of the Ozark Mountains, where with a French colonial administrator, Nathaniel filed a land claim for a 200-acre parcel near what is now Jasper County. The property is described as a fertile valley bounded by limestone bluffs to the north with ample water from a clear-running creek, substantial timber, and meadow suitable for cultivation in the official land claim preserved in territorial records. 306, compared with his earlier signatures from Virginia records, Nathaniel's signature on this document shows a notable steadiness, suggesting a man confident in his decision despite the perilous nature of frontier settlement. In the journal of a passing missionary, construction of the Pruitt homestead was documented, who noted in June 1776 that he came upon a family newly arrived from Virginia, industriously engaged in the construction of a substantial dwelling. 341, Mr. Pruitt has already erected a fine cabin of hewn logs, larger than most frontier habitations, with separate sleeping quarters for the parents and children, a common room of generous proportion, and a well-constructed root cellar for the storage of provisions, the missionary noted. That the family appeared in good health and spirits, particularly Mrs. Pruitt, who seemed much recovered from an earlier indisposition, the missionary also noted. 404, by a letter Nathaniel sent to his cousin in Virginia dated July 1776, this description of Sarah Pruitt's improved health was corroborated. "Sarah thrives in the mountain air. Her melancholy has lifted, and she tends the garden with vigor unknown since before Rebecca's birth. 427, the children, too, flourish in this wild country. Thomas assists me in improving our claim, while the girls have established a small schoolroom in a corner of the cabin where Elizabeth teaches her younger siblings their letters." The letter continues. With descriptions of the land that suggest Nathaniel believed he had found the fresh start his family needed, the letter continues. 449, the soil yields bountifully with little encouragement. We have planted corn and beans, squash and potatoes. The forest provides ample game, and the stream that passes near our door teems with fish. We want for nothing that honest labor cannot provide. A picture of the Pruitt family's first months in the Ozarks as a time of optimism and renewal is painted by these documented accounts, which makes what followed all the more disturbing. 518, from a fragment of what appears to be Nathaniel's personal journal discovered in 1952 by historian Arthur Fleming in the collection of a private antiquities dealer in Philadelphia, comes the first indication of trouble. The entry, dated September 18, 1776, marks a distinct change in tone from his earlier correspondence. Thomas discovered a peculiar opening in the limestone bluff behind the house today. 547, it appears to be a natural cave entrance partially obscured by fallen rock. The boy was eager to explore, but something about the darkness beyond the entrance filled me with unease. I forbade him to enter without my accompaniment, though I have no immediate intention of exploring the passage. 608, Sarah says I am being superstitious, but I cannot shake the feeling that some things are best left undisturbed. The first mention of what would become a recurring motif in the Pruitt mystery is contained in a subsequent entry dated September 30. The sound began 3 nights ago. A low rhythmic pulsing that seems to emanate from the direction of the cave. 631, Sarah cannot hear it, nor can the younger children, but Thomas confessed this morning that it has been keeping him awake. He described it as like a heartbeat, but not quite right. I told him it was merely the wind moving through the rock formations, but I do not believe this myself. An escalation is indicated by the next preserved entry, dated October 12, 1776. 656, Thomas's fascination with the cave entrance grows troubling. Twice this week I have found him standing before it at dawn as if he had been there all night. When questioned, he claims no memory of leaving his bed. Yesterday I found markings scratched into the ground before the entrance, symbols I do not recognize arranged in a circular pattern. 719, Thomas denies creating them, and indeed they do not seem like the work of a boy. I have covered them with stones and told the children to keep away from the bluff entirely. By late October, the journal entries suggest the situation was deteriorating rapidly. October 24, 1776. Elizabeth now speaks of hearing the sounds as well. 741, she describes them differently than Thomas. Voices singing without words, she says. I have caught her watching her brother when she thinks no one observes her. Something passes between them, some understanding I am not privy to. Sarah suggests it is merely the natural alliance of siblings, but I perceive something more troubling in their silent communications. 805, October 27, 1776. Found Catherine standing before the hearth at midnight, staring into the flames without blinking. When I touched her shoulder, she turned to me with an expression I can only describe as hunger, though not for food. She spoke a sentence in a language unknown to me, her voice deeper than should be possible for a child of 12. 8:30, when I pressed her about it in the morning, she had no recollection of the event. November 3, 1776. The markings have reappeared, not only before the cave entrance, but now etched into the wood of our dwelling, behind furniture, beneath rugs, in the corners of rooms. I have not caught anyone in the act of creating these symbols, yet they multiply daily. 8:55, Sarah finally admits that something is amiss, but attributes it to some fever or frontier madness. I am not convinced that the explanation is so mundane. The most disturbing entry, dated November 12, reads, the sound has returned, louder than before. Sarah insists it is merely the wind in the rock formations, but I know better. It comes from beneath. 9:20, the children hear it, too, though they no longer speak of it. Thomas watches the floor at night. Found him sleeping in the root cellar again this morning. Says he hears his name being called. A week later, on November 20th, Nathaniel wrote, Sarah found marks on the children this morning like small burns on their shoulders and backs. 9:41, she accuses me of discipline I did not administer. The marks form patterns I cannot comprehend. Elizabeth can now recite passages of scripture she has never been taught. When asked how she knows these words, she only smiles. Her teeth seem different somehow. Simply, the final entry from the journal, dated December 2, 1776, reads, I have found what lies beneath the root cellar. 10:09, God forgive me for bringing my family to this place. They are in the walls now. They speak with borrowed tongues. I have failed to protect them from what was waiting here long before we arrived. The French trader comes in 5 days. Perhaps there is still time. With historical records confirming that Jean-Baptiste Duval, a French fur trader, visited the area in early December, this last entry aligns. 1035, of the incident that would confound researchers for generations, his account of what he found at the Pruitt homestead represents the first outside documentation. Dated December 7, 1776, the following entry was contained in Duval's original ledger, preserved in the collection of the Missouri Historical Society but sealed from public view until 1968. 1058, arrived at the homestead of the Englishman Pruitt near midday. The cabin appeared in good order with smoke rising from the chimney and no outward sign of distress. Upon approaching, however, I observed an unnatural stillness, no movement within or without, no sound of human activity or animal husbandry. The door stood partially open. 1121, within I discovered a scene unnatural in its perfection, as if the family had simply turned to vapor while going about their daily tasks. A meal laid upon the table, still warm, 5 places set, though the family numbered 7, garments folded neatly upon chairs, the hearth fire burning low but not extinguished. 1142, most peculiar was the family Bible laid open upon the table, certain passages in the Book of Judges marked with a substance that appeared to be blood. I shall not transcribe the verses here, for they disturb my thoughts even now, though they were familiar texts. I called for the family, searching the sleeping quarters and the surroundings of the cabin, but found no sign of recent human passage. 1207, no tracks in the soft earth save my own, though a light snow had fallen the previous night, and should have preserved any evidence of departure. I confess I experienced a profound dread unlike any I have known in 20 years of frontier travel. Though no threat presented itself, I felt observed from all directions, as if the very walls of the cabin held eyes. 1229, in the root cellar I discovered, here several lines of text have been deliberately obscured by what appears to be ink. I shall not speak further of what I found there. Some things are best left undocumented, lest they take root in one's dreams. I departed with haste, traveling through the night despite the dangers, so great was my desire to put distance between myself and that place. 1254, I shall report the disappearance to the colonial administrator at Fort Charlesworth, though I doubt any action will result given the remoteness of the location and the present military concerns. A follow-up entry in Duval's ledger dated December 10 indicates he did indeed report his findings. The administrator has dispatched 3 militia men to investigate the Pruitt homestead. 1320, I declined to accompany them despite the offered compensation. No sum would induce me to return to that valley. I provided detailed directions and advised them to exercise extreme caution, particularly regarding the root cellar. I fear my warnings were received with skepticism. That 3 militiamen identified as Corporal James Harlow, Private William Shearer, and Private Thomas Jenkins were dispatched to investigate the Pruitt homestead on December 12, 1776, is confirmed by colonial administrative records. 1354, in preserved records, no official report of their findings exists. More telling is a brief note in the duty roster dated January 20, 1777. Harlow, Shearer, and Jenkins to be listed as deserted, their accounts forfeit. Standard military procedure of the time, which would typically list men who failed to return from an official mission as missing rather than deserted, is contradicted by this classification. 1422, the attention of Claude Fontaine, the colonial administrator who had ordered the investigation, was caught by this discrepancy. Included a letter to his superior dated January 25, 1777, his personal correspondence discovered during a 1964 archival project at Washington University. I must express grave concern regarding the Pruitt matter. 1447, the men dispatched to investigate have not returned, nor has any communication from them been received. This marks the disappearance of an entire family of 7, followed by 3 militia men sent to determine their fate. I have interviewed the trapper Duval again and found him reluctant to elaborate on his initial report. 1507, he exhibits signs of acute distress when pressed for details, particularly regarding what he observed in the root cellar of the homestead. I propose a larger expedition, properly armed, to determine what has occurred. While frontier disappearances are not uncommon, the circumstances as described by Duval suggest something beyond the usual dangers of Indian hostility or natural calamity. 1534, furthermore, the proximity of the Pruitt claim to the cave systems known to exist in that region raises additional concerns given the recent discoveries made by the geological expedition led by Dr. Montrose last summer. In colonial archives, no record of a response to Fontaine's letter exists. However, a military dispatch dated February 8, 1777, notes that a patrol of 6 men led by Lieutenant Burke investigated reported disturbances near the western limestone formations and found no evidence of recent human habitation or distress. 1613, suggesting an intentional obscuring of the purpose and findings of this second expedition, is the carefully neutral language of this report with no specific mention of the Pruitt family or homestead. From subsequent records, what is clear is that by March 1777, the Pruitt homestead had been destroyed. Referring to it only as the unclaimed parcel formerly registered to Pruitt now returned to territorial inventory, a land survey conducted in April 1777 makes no mention of a structure on the property. 1650, this represents a highly unusual administrative action, as frontier land claims typically remained in a family's name for at least 7 years, even in cases of abandonment or death, to allow for claims by relatives or heirs. Were it not for the persistence of oral traditions in the region, the systematic erasure of the Pruitt family from official records might have been complete. 1714, as white settlement of the Ozarks increased in the early 19th century, stories of the family that disappeared became part of local folklore. Elements not found in the fragmentary official records, details that would later find disturbing correlation in suppressed documents, were often contained in these accounts. Recorded by Reverend Silas Whitman, who served as a circuit preacher in the region from 1818 to 1832, was one such oral tradition. 1744, in his personal papers preserved at the Arkansas Historical Society, Whitman documented stories told to him by early settlers. The old-timers speak of a family that came to the valley before the Revolution. They built their home over an old Indian burial site despite warnings from a local trapper. The father discovered a cave entrance on their property and began to hear voices calling to him from below. 1810, the children were the first to change, becoming silent and strange with eyes that reflected no light. Then the mother took to walking at night, speaking in tongues no Christian had heard before. The father held out longest, but in the end he too was taken by what lived beneath the earth. When a trapper found the homestead, the family was gone, but something wearing their skins remained for a time. 1836, the militia men who went to investigate never returned to the fort. A larger party was sent, and they found the house empty, but for strange markings carved everywhere. They burned the place to cleanse it, but it is said that the ground there remains cursed, nothing will grow and animals avoid it. Most disturbing is the claim that sometimes travelers report seeing children playing near the ruins in the twilight. 1901, children with eyes that reflect no light, who invite passers-by to come below and meet the family. Those who follow are never seen again. Noted Whitman that he initially dismissed these accounts as frontier superstition, but became troubled by their consistency across settlements that had no apparent connection to each other. 1921, I have heard essentially the same narrative with only minor variations from settlers in locations 50 miles apart who claim no knowledge of each other, he wrote. This suggests either an underlying factual basis or a remarkably widespread transmission of folklore in a region not known for easy communication between isolated communities. 1944, in 1841, historian William Porter of St. Louis became the first scholar to attempt a comprehensive investigation of the Pruitt incident. His interest was piqued by references to the Pruitt tragedy in correspondence between early territorial administrators. Documenting his methodical approach to unraveling the mystery are Porter's research notes, partially preserved in the collection of the Missouri Historical Society. 2011, having encountered multiple references to the Pruitt incident in the correspondence of Claude Fontaine, I have undertaken to determine the facts of this matter. Initial inquiries with the territorial archives yielded little information, with several documents noted in inventory lists mysteriously absent from their expected locations. 2031, this pattern of missing documentation is itself noteworthy. I have identified descendants of Jean-Baptiste Duval living near St. Genevieve and hope to determine if any family papers might contain additional information about his encounter with the Pruitt homestead. I have also located church records from the period that may contain information about the family prior to their disappearance. 2057, indicating increasing frustration with official obstacles to his research, were Porter's subsequent notes. My request to examine the sealed portion of the Fontaine correspondence has been denied without explanation. Similarly, military records from Fort Charlesworth for the period in question are reportedly lost. I find it difficult to believe that documentation from multiple sources would be simultaneously unavailable unless some effort has been made to restrict access. 2128. More troubling is the reaction I have received from certain officials when making these inquiries. The territorial archivist, upon hearing the name, visibly paled and informed me that no such records existed despite my having seen references in indexes. A retired military officer suggested I would be wise to let sleeping dogs lie and find another subject for historical research. 2154. Despite these obstacles, Porter persisted, turning to unofficial sources such as local folklore, church records, and the private papers of frontier families. His breakthrough came in the form of a journal kept by Elizabeth Carver, wife of a militiaman stationed at Fort Charlesworth in 1777. In an entry dated February 20 of that year, she wrote, "James has returned from the expedition to the Pruitt place, much altered. 2222, he will not speak of what they found there, but he wakes screaming in the night. He has taken to examining the floor of our cabin and listening at the walls. Yesterday, I found him carving strange marks into the support beams, similar to those Dr. Hartford discovered on the body of Jenkins when they brought him back. 2242, James claims no memory of doing this. Dr. Hartford confided in me that Jenkins died not from any wound or illness he could identify, but rather as if life simply departed from his body over the course of several days. Before the end, Jenkins spoke repeatedly of those who wait below and the replacement that must occur. James refuses to discuss Jenkins or Shearer, changing the subject whenever they are mentioned. 2310, the first documentation that at least one of the militia men, Thomas Jenkins, did return from the initial investigation only to die under mysterious circumstances is represented by this journal entry. It also introduces elements that would become recurring motifs in the Pruitt mystery, those strange markings, the references to those who wait below, and the concept of replacement. 2335, Porter's research notes indicate he located and interviewed descendants of James Harlow, the militia corporal listed as deserted. Met today with Jacob Harlow, great-grandson of Corporal James Harlow. According to family law, Harlow did not desert, but returned from his mission in a state of severe mental disturbance. He was confined to an outbuilding on the family farm after he attempted to lead his children to a cave he had discovered nearby, telling them that the family below wished to meet them. 2400 hours 05, according to Jacob, his ancestor spent his final weeks carving symbols into the walls of his confinement and speaking in multiple voices, including those of children. Before his death, he reportedly told his wife, "They look like us. They sound like us, but they are not us. They are patient. So patient. They have always been here waiting beneath." Jacob claims the outbuilding was burned after Harlow's death. When I inquired whether any record of the symbols remained, he produced a small leather pouch containing a piece of wood approximately 4 inches square with markings carved into its surface. He permitted me to make a drawing, but refused to part with the artifact, stating that family tradition held that the mark must stay with the blood or misfortune would follow. 2400 hours 56, a series of interconnected symbols resembling stylized human figures arranged in a circular pattern around what appears to be a representation of a cave or tunnel entrance is shown in Porter's drawing of the wooden artifact. Noted by Porter, who likely had no knowledge of such archaeological findings, but would be observed by later researchers, was the similarity of these symbols to prehistoric rock art found in certain Ozark cave systems. 25:26, a sealed letter from Claude Fontaine to his superior dated March 10, 1777, which Porter discovered in the personal collection of Fontaine's granddaughter, was the most revealing document uncovered by Porter. "I write to you in strictest confidence regarding the matter of the Pruitt homestead and the subsequent investigations. 25:48, I believe we have done what is necessary in destroying the dwelling and expunging the related documents from official records, but I remain deeply troubled by what we discovered. The testimony of Jenkins before his death, combined with the evidence found at the site, suggests something beyond ordinary human comprehension. 26:08, the markings found throughout the dwelling match those discovered in the deeper chambers of the cave system behind the homestead, markings that Dr. Montrose's expedition documented last summer and attributed to an ancient indigenous civilization. Most disturbing were the items discovered in the root cellar, which appeared to have been deliberately constructed over a natural shaft leading to the cave system below. 26:36, the cloth pouches containing human remains of varying antiquity suggest that whatever influence affected the Pruitt family has been present in that location for generations, perhaps centuries. Jenkins spoke of seeing the missing militiamen, Harlow and Shearer, in the caves below the homestead, but claimed they were no longer themselves. 26:57, his description of their behavior and appearance before his escape matches what the trapper Duval reported about the Pruitt children: a perfect stillness, unnatural smiles, and eyes that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. I believe we have contained the immediate threat by sealing the most accessible cave entrances and removing all record of the Pruitt claim from official documents. 27:20, however, I cannot shake the conviction that we have merely postponed rather than prevented a recurrence. The limestone formations in that region are riddled with passages, many too narrow for adult human entry, but perhaps navigable by children or smaller individuals. I recommend that no further settlement be permitted within 5 miles of the original Pruitt claim under the pretext of uncertain land titles or military reservation if necessary. 27:50, furthermore, I suggest that any reports of unusual behavior or disappearances in the broader region be brought to our immediate attention rather than processed through standard administrative channels. What we are dealing with, I fear, is not a singular tragedy, but the discovery of something that has existed alongside human settlement for untold generations. 28:14, something that waits, watches, and occasionally reaches out to claim those who venture too close to its domain. The first documented evidence of an official cover-up regarding the Pruitt incident is provided by this letter, with its references to deliberate suppression of information and the sealing of cave entrances. 28:36, it also introduces the concept that whatever happened to the family was connected to something ancient that predated their arrival. Porter's final journal entry, dated October 15, 1841, reveals the profound impact his research had on him. I now understand why this matter has been systematically obscured. What occurred in that valley was not merely a tragedy, but something that challenges our understanding of human nature itself. 29:02, the patterns I have discerned across decades of incidents in that region suggest an influence that persists beyond the original event, manifesting whenever human habitation encroaches upon certain underground spaces. I have decided to abandon this research and destroy my notes. The knowledge I have accumulated feels dangerous, not merely to my academic reputation, but to my fundamental well-being. 29:30, since examining the Harlow artifact, I have experienced increasing disturbances in my sleep and moments of dissociation during waking hours. I find myself drawn to the walls of my study with an inexplicable urge to recreate the symbols I have seen. Most troubling, I have begun to hear sounds emanating from beneath the floorboards of my home. 29:54, sounds that my wife and servants cannot detect. A rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat, but somehow wrong. The same sound described by Nathaniel Pruitt in his journal. I believe the authorities were correct in their decision to conceal these events. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve. Reportedly destroyed in a fire at his home the following week were Porter's research materials. 30:18, he survived but never spoke or wrote of the Pruitt family again. He would reportedly become physically ill and refused to discuss the matter when questioned by colleagues. He died 3 years later, his once promising academic career abandoned. For nearly 80 years following Porter's investigation, the Pruitt incident remained largely forgotten outside of local folklore. 30:44, however, beginning in the mid-19th century, a pattern of similar incidents in the same geographic region began to emerge. Incidents that would eventually draw renewed scholarly attention to the original mystery. A family named Collins, who settled approximately 10 miles from the original Pruitt homestead, is described in court records from 1847. 31:07, within months, neighbors reported unusual behavior from the family's 4 children, including prolonged silences, speaking in unison, and standing motionless in their yard for hours, staring at the ground. When local authorities investigated, they found the parents in a catatonic state and walls covered with markings similar to those described in the suppressed colonial reports. 31:31, the children reportedly told investigators that the people under the floor had instructed them to prepare for the replacement. All 6 family members were committed to an asylum in St. Louis, where they died within a year, having never provided a coherent explanation for what occurred. Detailed notes on the Collins family were kept by the attending physician at the asylum, Dr. Frederick Schaefer, portions of which were discovered during a 1962 renovation of the former asylum building. 31:53, the Collins children present a most unusual case of shared delusion or folia famile star. All 4, ranging in age from 6 to 13 years, maintain an identical narrative regarding entities they claim exist beneath their former home. 32:17, they describe these beings as resembling humans, but possessing qualities that mark them as other eyes that absorb rather than reflect light, movements too fluid to be natural, and voices that seem to bypass the ears and manifest directly in the mind. Most disturbing is their consistent claim that these entities are gradually replacing humans in the region, beginning with isolated families. 32:47, when asked to elaborate on this process of replacement, the children become agitated and begin carving symbols into any available surface. Symbols that bear a striking resemblance to those documented in cases of religious mania despite the children having no apparent exposure to such materials. The parents remain unresponsive to treatment, exhibiting a profound catatonia interrupted only by periods of glossolalia. 33:14, during these episodes, they speak in what linguistic experts identify as a mixture of languages, including elements of Osage and other indigenous dialects interspersed with what appears to be a language unknown to current scholarship. Physical examination reveals unusual markings on all family members, patterns of small, perfectly circular lesions approximately a quarter-inch in diameter arranged in geometric configurations on the upper back, shoulders, and base of the skull. 33:46, these lesions do not appear to be the result of any known disease process or physical trauma. Dr. Schaefer's notes end with a troubling observation. I am forced to consider whether the Collins family's condition might result from environmental factors specific to their settlement location rather than purely psychological causes. The geographical proximity to the site of the infamous Pruitt incident of 1776, which I had previously dismissed as frontier mythology, now strikes me as potentially significant. 34:21, I have written to the Missouri Historical Society requesting access to any documentation of the earlier case for comparative study. No record of a response to Schaefer's inquiry exists, and his subsequent medical publications make no further mention of the Collins case. However, asylum records indicate that following the death of the last Collins family member, Dr. Schaefer took an extended leave of absence, citing health concerns. 34:46, he never returned to his position and reportedly relocated to Boston, where he abandoned psychiatric practice in favor of botanical research. In records from 1879, 1904, and 1936, all within the same geographic area, similar cases appeared, all exhibiting the same pattern of behavioral changes, mysterious markings, and references to entities beneath the earth. 35:17, in each case, official investigations concluded with either commitment of survivors to institutions or determinations of mass suicide or murder-suicide. Alternative explanations were not entertained in official records despite inconsistencies that troubled investigators. A family named Whitaker, who had purchased land approximately 15 miles from the original Pruitt homestead, was involved in the 1879 case. 35:45, a letter from the local pastor to his bishop expressing concern about the family is included in church records from the period. The Whitaker children have not attended Sunday school for 3 weeks. Upon visiting the family, I discovered a troubling transformation in their demeanor. These previously lively and inquisitive young people now sit in perfect stillness, speaking only when directly addressed, and then in a manner that seems rehearsed. Mrs. Whittaker appears heavily sedated, though she denies taking any medication. Mr. Whittaker was not present, reportedly engaged in improvements to the root cellar. 36:15 Most disturbing was my discovery of unusual markings carved into the underside of their furniture and the back of religious paintings, symbols of a kind I have never encountered, certainly not Christian in nature. When I inquired about these markings, the eldest daughter, Mary, aged 12, informed me that those below required them for the preparation. When pressed on what she meant, she smiled in a manner I can only describe as predatory. I fear some unwholesome influence has taken hold of this family and request guidance on how to proceed with pastoral care in this troubling situation. 37:06 No record of a response from the bishop exists. Local newspaper archives indicate that the Whittaker family home burned to the ground 2 weeks after the date of this letter, reportedly due to a lantern overturned during a family disagreement. The remains of all family members were said to have been recovered and buried in the church cemetery, though cemetery records from the period show no entry for Whittaker burials. 37:36 The 1904 case is better documented, as it coincided with increased newspaper coverage of rural communities. The Miller family, John, his wife Eleanor, and their 3 children, had relocated from Chicago to a rural property in the Ozarks to establish a self-sufficient farm. 6 months after their arrival, local authorities were called to the property by concerned neighbors who had not seen the family for over a week. 38:03 The Jefferson County Gazette reported on October 12, 1904, family tragedy in remote settlement. Sheriff's deputies made a grim discovery yesterday at the Miller homestead where all 5 family members were found deceased under bizarre circumstances. According to Sheriff Wilson, the family appeared to have been dead for several days, though no signs of violence or struggle were evident. 38:30 It's the strangest case I've encountered in 15 years of law enforcement, Wilson stated. The family was seated at their dining table as if taking a meal, but there was no food present. The positions appeared peaceful with no indication of distress. Medical examiner Dr. James Harrison has ordered the bodies transported to St. Louis for further examination as the cause of death could not be determined at the scene. 38:57 Neighbors reported that the Miller family had become increasingly reclusive in recent months, with the children withdrawn from the local school in September. Of particular note were extensive modifications to the property discovered during the investigation, including an elaborately expanded root cellar with multiple chambers extending into the limestone formation behind the home. 39:22 Deputies reported unusual markings throughout the dwelling, which Sheriff Wilson declined to describe in detail. A follow-up article a week later reported that the medical examiner had determined the cause of death to be consumption of a poisonous fungal substance, likely mistaken for edible mushrooms, a conclusion that failed to explain why no trace of such substance was found in the home or why the family would have remained seated at the table as the poison took effect. 39:51 More revealing is a personal letter written by Deputy Samuel Jenkins to his brother, discovered during a 1965 research project on early law enforcement in the Ozarks. I cannot shake the memory of what we found at the Miller place. The official report mentions the family seated at the table, but it doesn't capture the wrongness of the scene. 40:13 They were *2* still, arranged *2* perfectly, and their expressions not peaceful as the sheriff claimed, but empty, as if something essential had been extracted from them. The markings we found weren't simple graffiti or religious symbols. They covered every surface: walls, ceilings, floors, even carved into the family's furniture and etched onto their silverware intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. 40:40 The longer I studied them, the more I felt they were studying me in return. But it was the root cellar that truly disturbs my sleep. The official report mentions modifications, but doesn't explain that the family had excavated a passage extending at least 30 feet into the limestone bluff behind their home. At the terminus of this passage was a vertical shaft descending into darkness. 41:05 We could not determine its depth as dropped torches were extinguished before reaching bottom. Near this shaft, we discovered a journal belonging to John Miller. The entries from their first months were ordinary accounts of farm establishment. But beginning in August, they took a troubling turn. 41:23, Miller wrote of hearing sounds emanating from the bluff at night. Voices without words, he called them. He described his children becoming fascinated with the limestone formation, spending hours pressing their ears to the rock face. The final entries document Miller's discovery of the cave entrance and his initial exploration. 41:45, he described finding evidence of previous habitation of great antiquity and markings identical to those my children have begun drawing without ever having seen them. The last coherent entry, dated October 1st, reads, "They are not speaking to us. They are speaking through us. I fear we have become vessels for something that has waited in darkness for generations." 42:10, the sheriff ordered the journal burned after reading it. He also commanded us never to speak of the shaft or the markings, instructing the medical examiner to find a plausible natural cause for the deaths. When I questioned this decision, he took me aside and told me that similar cases had occurred in the region before and that official policy was to prevent panic and preserve property values. 42:36, I handed in my badge the following week. I cannot serve in an office that conceals truth, particularly when I suspect that concealment may enable future tragedies. I write this account so that some record of what really happened may survive. Deputy Jenkins reportedly left Missouri shortly after his resignation, relocating to Oklahoma. 42:59, attempts by later researchers to locate him or his descendants proved unsuccessful. The 1936 case is particularly well documented, as it involved a family named Larson who had recently relocated from Chicago to a rural property in the Ozarks. The father, Edward Larson, was a journalist who had actually come to the region researching historical disappearances for a book. 43:24, neighbors reported that the family's behavior changed dramatically approximately 2 months after they began renovations on their property, renovations that included expanding the home's root cellar. The final police report indicated that Larson killed his wife and 2 children before taking his own life, but responding officers noted inconsistencies they could not explain. 43:46, the family was found seated at their dining table, deceased, but showing no visible injuries. Autopsy results were sealed by court order and remain unavailable to researchers. Most notable was the statement by the sheriff's deputy who first entered the home: they were sitting there like they were frozen in time. 44:07, all of them staring at the same spot on the floor. Their faces didn't look right, like they were stretched somehow. And the